Alice Roosevelt was one supremely naughty girl, especially for the daughter of a president. One of the most beautiful women and most raucous socialites of her time, Alice lit up newspapers around the world with her antics, driving her father Theodore Roosevelt wild. Only it wasn't all harmless fun. When Alice was forced to leave the White House after William Taft was elected, she left a disturbing goodbye gift for the new First Lady. If you're wondering why Alice Roosevelt turned into a wild child, look no further than the hour of her birth. Although she was the daughter of future President Theodore Roosevelt and his wife, banking heiress Alice Lee Roosevelt, the little baby was in for an immediate tragedy. Just 2 days after her birth, on Valentine's Day 1884 no less, Alice's young mother died in the bloom of her youth, succumbing to kidney failure that no one had even known existed. No sooner had she drawn her first breaths than Alice was a harbinger of doom, and it just kept getting worse. As if it wasn't enough to have your mother drop dead within hours of your birth, Alice's father then dealt her a heartbreaking blow. He had loved his young, beautiful wife dearly, and now couldn't even stand to be in his daughter's presence after the tragedy. He immediately escaped to his remote North Dakota ranch while sending Alice to live with her Aunt Anna for years on end. A dead mother, an absent father, and a whole bunch of repressed feelings. What could possibly go wrong? Answer: everything. When she was just 2 years old, Alice's father remarried, this time to his old high school sweetheart, the stately and proper Edith Kermit Caro. As Alice grew up, she blossomed into a young, delicate beauty who looked astonishingly like her mother. Well, her new stepmother Edith did not like this, and she made sure Alice knew it. Edith once sneered that if Alice's mother hadn't passed prematurely, she would have bored Theodore to death. When young Alice received this cruel slight, she struck back with a vengeance. When Theodore, then the governor of New York, and her stepmother insisted she attend a girls' school in New York City, Alice wrote back a scathing letter. She wrote, "If you send me, I will humiliate you. I will do something that will shame you. I tell you I will." As time wore on, Alice's charms wore thin even on her indulgent father, and she came to believe that he preferred her new, younger half-siblings with Edith over her. Not that this changed her behavior. Perhaps lashing out, she became even more stubborn and wild, taking up the habit of running the streets uncontrolled with every boy in town. Or so her stepmother thought. She became notorious for smoking, drinking, gambling, and staying up way later than was proper with gentlemen callers. In 1901, Alice's father Theodore was serving as Vice President of the United States when a national nightmare shook Washington's foundations. President William McKinley was assassinated. Suddenly, Roosevelt was acting president, and the teenaged Alice, still just 17 years old, became the first daughter. Her reaction was, well, pretty ghoulish. Despite the grim circumstances, she reportedly heard the news with sheer rapture. It only ramped up from there. In 1902, Alice officially came out as a debutante. She was an instant sensation. That evening, she decided on wearing a slightly unconventional pale blue gown as opposed to a white frock, and sparked a fashion trend in the process. Admirers dubbed the icy color Alice Blue, and women across America started wearing it. Yet behind her picture-perfect looks at these functions, Alice was already showing disturbing tendencies. While Alice was fun to be around in her best moods, she had a terrifying mean streak. At one point, she was bored in a White House gathering and decided to put attack on a middle-aged and dignified man's chair, and then watch as he sat down and promptly bolted up like the ball from the cannon while she acted innocent beside him. Very funny, Alice. But when it came to family members instead of strangers, she could go from mean to downright insufferable. One day, this led to an infamous altercation. On this particular day, Alice must have been feeling opinionated because she interrupted her father no fewer than 3 times while he was trying to have a conversation with his friend, the writer Owen Wister. Finally, the president broke. Pushed to his wits' end, he threatened to throw Alice out the window unless she left him alone, then famously huffed to Wister, "I can either run the country or I can attend to Alice, but I cannot possibly do both." How prophetic those words turned out to be. In 1905, Alice joined a handful of congressmen on a diplomat cruise bound for Japan and China, among other destinations. But one evening it went from stately to scandalous. Bored, as usual, with the serious crowd, Alice bounded into the ship's pool with all her clothes on and even took a reluctant congressman with her. This antic caused an immediate uproar. Alice's response? She merely stated that it would have been even more scandalous if she had done the prank with her clothes off. Still, even with all this late-night pool jumping, that wasn't even the most outrageous thing to happen on that ship. While sailing around the world relatively unsupervised, the vivacious Alice happened to get extra friendly with one congressman in particular. Nicholas Longworth III, a self-serious Republican with something of a hangdog face and a reputation as a playboy. Longworth was a whopping 14 years old older than Alice, and more than that, he creepily bore quite the resemblance to her father, Theodore Roosevelt. For reasons Freud would probably find fascinating, Alice found Longworth irresistible and admitted lukewarmly that she was more or less in love with him. If that sounds shaky, well, Alice started making some very shaky decisions from then on. By the time the diplomatic ship docked back in the United States, Alice had some news that set the rumor mill spinning. She was engaged to Nicholas Longworth, perhaps as unlikely a groom in her sea of suitors as she could get, minus his political bona fides. Still, Alice threw herself into wedding planning with a gusto only she could muster, and she did not disappoint. Alice Roosevelt's wedding was going to be the social event of the season, no matter what happened, but the socialite really made sure all eyes were on her. Not only did she wear a light blue wedding dress, a nod to the Alice Blue that she herself had coined, she also cut her massive gorgeous wedding cake with a sword she borrowed from a military aide during her reception. For the first years of her marriage, Alice and Longworth got along famously, but the ties that bound them were already fraying at the edges. In 1912, Alice dealt Longworth one of the worst betrayals she could. She publicly opposed his run for election. Longworth lost, and when he did, Alice proudly boasted that she was the reason. For some couples, maybe this love-hate thing would spice up the relationship. For Alice and Longworth, though, it created an enormous rift, one that grew wider with Alice's next move. Exactly when Alice's eyes started to stray is hard to pin down, but it's an absolute fact that she carried on multiple affairs behind Longworth's back, or worse, even in front of him. One of Alice's most prominent and long-term affairs was with Senator William Borah, a man who, like Longworth, was decades older than her, but, according to Alice, much steamier in the bedroom. Around 1925, Alice found out shocking news. After more than a decade in her childless marriage to Longworth, she was pregnant. Those in the know in Washington suspected that Borah, whose own marriage was equally childless, was the father. But when the child was born, well, Alice took it right up a notch. Fun-loving and smart, people often describe Alice Roosevelt's humor as brilliantly malicious, and she saved her cruelest dig for her cockled husband. Although she ended up naming her baby girl Paulina, she once quipped that she initially wanted to name her Deborah, as in Deborah. Ouch. As it was, anyone who knew the girl nicknamed her Aurora Bora Alice. Double ouch. Still, Alice was just getting started. Truth be told, Alice was about as good a mother to Paulina as she had been a faithful wife to Longworth. Wrapped up in her glittering world of social events, Alice didn't have much time to raise Paulina, and they never developed a close bond even in adulthood. As we'll soon see, this would come back to haunt her. In the 1940s, Alice became a grandmother after her daughter Paulina married the American artist and author Alexander McCormick Sturm and had a child, Joanna, with him. It looked like the great American golden family was back in its glory, yet, as with so much in Alice's life, appearances could be deceiving. In reality, she was about to go through a dark crisis. In 1951, when baby Joanna was still a young girl, Alexander Sturm passed suddenly of hepatitis, leaving Paulina grieving and Alice struggling to pick up the pieces of her family. In 1957, Paulina passed away from an overdose of sleeping pills, leaving the young Joanna in Alice's care. Whether out of guilt for her previous lack of maternal care or a newfound maturity, Alice treated Joanna almost the opposite of how she treated her own daughter. She doted on and spoiled the young girl, and the pair became inseparable. As one friend put it, Alice has been a wonderful father and mother to Joanna. Of course, this doesn't mean Alice was losing her edge. In fact, as some powerful men soon found out, she was sharpening it. As Princess Alice grew older, she practically became Dowager Empress of America, and she wielded a terrific amount of political power. When a man named Thomas Dewey tried to become president, it was Alice who made sure he would be forgotten in the annals of history. When she unfavorably compared his looks to the bridegroom on the wedding cake, it was enough to almost single-handedly lose him 2 presidential elections in a row. One of Alice's most famous friends was the then Vice President Richard Nixon. Not only did Nixon act as one of her pallbearers when her daughter Paulina suffered her tragic end, but Alice also encouraged his political career, consistently and insistently inviting him to all the right parties until he did become president. Instead of gratitude, however, Alice only got betrayal. In the 1970s, the Watergate scandal hit, and Nixon's name was permanently tarnished. At his resignation, the disgraced Nixon decided to quote from one of Alice's published diary entries, specifically the one recalling her father's grief over her late mother, where she wrote that, "Only if you've been to the lowest valley can you know how great it is to be on the highest mountaintop." Never one to miss a beat, Alice made sure to watch Nixon's resignation on her television, and when she heard her now ex-friend using her own words to justify his shady actions, she went wild with rage. Reacting with the classic Alice gusto, she reportedly let out a string of curses at her screen and denounced him as her friend. Eventually, all good things come to an end. And although Alice's miserable marriage kept going against all odds, her father Theodore's tenure as president didn't. In 1909, he left the White House to make way for the 27th president, William Taft. But after all her years as first daughter, Alice was none too happy to give up her privileges, and she let the new occupants know it in a terrifying way. As she was leaving the White House with her father, Alice left a disturbing goodbye present. She had made a voodoo doll in the likeness of the incoming First Lady, Nellie Taft, and upon her exit, Alice burned the grim doll in the front yard of the property. Evidently, Alice never quite clicked with the Tafts, and they even later banned her from the White House. In the end, Alice outlived all her younger siblings, as well as so many other giants of American history who she had met and even shaped. Still, even she couldn't live forever. On February 20th, 1980, she passed in her Embassy Row house in Washington, D.C. The cherry on top, she made it just 8 days past her 96th birthday, an overachiever until the very end. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page Factinate for more incredible facts about everything.